And
I'm sorry, go ahead, Professor.
I was just going to say, and we should give Republicans credit. In New Hampshire this weekend, Rand Paul was talking about this very issue of opening up the base. I mean, there are people on the Republican side, and I am no huge
Rand Paul was
Rand
also
Paul.
the same guy.
I am no huge
who
Rand
also
Paul
said he
fan,
wouldn't have
but
believed in the civil rights legislation. So honestly, if the four of us went down to Kentucky, and Kentucky doesn't want Dominic to eat at the table with us, he would have been fine with that.
Well,
okay? No, he did say that. That he said that it should be up to businesses to decide who they can admit and who they can serve. So while Rand Paul is, I'm not going to give him credit here that he's a visionary, because in his world, all people wouldn't be equal. That's up to the proprietor. So,
but you know, that's the kind of thing you need to say instead of saying he's a racist.
Oh.
That's factual information.
Okay, but Richard, what about this issue? As far as the voter registration crackdowns that Republicans want to engage in.
I'm with you.
As the Democrats argue, one, where's the fraud? Where's the evidence? And two, could it be that they only want to crack down because President Obama has scared the hell out of them? They have seen people of color and progressive turn out in historic numbers to vote. And if they don't stop the voting, they can't win.
And there have been some. I believe that there's a legitimate part of the electorate or part of the electoral body who believes that this should be a new standard here for voting. But there have been people caught on camera saying, and we've heard them, elected officials saying this will suppress black turnout. I mean, remember the guy that was caught on camera, state legislator in Ohio, and another guy also said that, I think it was in Tennessee. So this is a tactic here. Okay, anyway, but I enjoy the spirited debate. Now, it does seem that many of the activists, let's say, who were inspired by the president back in '08 are turning away from politics and stepping in a different direction. An article in the Times says it appears that few of the young people who voted for him and even fewer Obama campaign and administrative ops have decided to actually run for office. Far more have joined high-paid consultant ranks. Is the so-called Obama effect wearing off? And I ask that because people get inspired. I'm curious, was there a person or an event that inspired you to go into public service? I know you were in the Peace Corps before.
It would be too long. I had a third grade teacher who taught me how to read, and I read kids' version of historic people, and I always wanted to be in government. But I have to tell you, you know, President Kennedy probably had a lot to do with it. You know, I joined the Peace Corps. You know, the sad thing is, and this is, I have deep criticism of my own party. Government has a role, and we have a role to help our government succeed.
Yep.
And sadly, that's gotten lost in my party.
You see it play out, Jeannie, when so many people, you think if you're ever going to have a constituency that's committed, it would be people that worked on a campaign, a historic campaign. Forget your politics. If you worked there, I remember in '08, I mean, John McCain was very gracious in defeat. He acknowledged we just saw history happen. But the fact is so few of those people are pursuing not only office, but to work in government. I think it says something. I'm not sure what it says, but it does say something that things have gotten. It's not a good thing for the country, I don't think.
No, it's a horrible thing. I mean, look at what smart thinking person wants to put themselves out there to be run through the ringer in exactly the way we've just talked about. I know plenty of young people, many of whom I teach for the NYU program, who want to be consultants. Very few of them want to run for office. As an example, young women do not want to because they know it is going to be very difficult to have a career and have a family and put themselves through what somebody like Kristen Gillibrand, to her credit, has done. And so you find very few people, and in her case, like so many cases, it's a family member who's inspired them. I mean, Congressman Shays has other people inspired. In many of these cases, it's your father, it's your aunt, it's your grandmother, it's somebody who's done it before you, and we see fewer and fewer young people.
Politics is so different today.
It's so different.
And you know, I couldn't
destructive.
I couldn't understand in 2002, you know, people said, you know, Congressman Shays did this. You know, he's an honest guy, but he did a stupid thing. And then in 2004 was, Congressman Shays said this, but he actually did this. And they started going after my character. And I couldn't understand it until I read the book about Rahm Emanuel. Rahm Emanuel had 3 basic things he recommended. Find dirt on your opponent. Newt Gingrich loved doing the same thing. Second thing was make life so miserable they or their spouse doesn't want them to be in politics. And the third thing was go after your opponent's character. Because once your opponent has lost their character, lost the trust, you can't win it back. You can't win it back. And so by the time I was out of politics, losing in '08, my wife was not disappointed because it wasn't the same thing that it used to be.
You know, Richard, I remember being with candidate Obama, and like you were in places like New Hampshire and places like Nevada, watching people burst out in tears at the possibility of him making history. The point I'm trying to make is that expectations didn't match reality. He was never going to walk on water. And so that's why it's going to be natural to have a letdown because, one, he has to deal with the Congress, as no matter who the president is, as we know, Democrat or Republican. And I watched the same thing when Mandela was elected. I watched the same thing when David Dinkins was elected, the first black mayor of New York City. People expect that you're going to wave a magic wand and everything's going to change.
You know what, Don?
It doesn't work that way.
I know you're right, but listen, some people say, hey, Rich, you know, and I believe there's a noble calling to elected office. You don't do it for the money, okay? Everybody knows this. You don't do it for the quality of life. You have to work 6 days, 7 days a week. You got to go to chicken dinners 4 nights a week. You got to go like this with your hand out here and ask people for money. So it's certainly not, you know, you're high on the hog. But I still believe, like he does, that there is a role and that you can at times, you know, reach the higher soul of man. I mean, there's a goodness that we can get to. But to me, my answer would always come down to this: why would I put myself, family, and everyone else through everything to hopefully aspire to a position where less than 10% of Americans give me an approval rating before I've even walked in the office? And that's a shame of it, but that to me is one of those things that, how do you get by, you know? Both sides have demonized the other before they even try. Good and decent people say, why would I want to do that in my life? Really? You know? It's a shame, and everybody's equally culpable.
Years ago, it used to be elected officials that were on TV. Now it's the consultants. When I ran for the Senate, I felt all I was doing was raising money for the consultants. That's all I felt like. I was just raising money for the consultants.
Can I just, back to Lee Atwater, watch Boogeyman,
Yes.
the documentary Boogeyman. It is frightening depiction of what has happened in American politics since.
I'll give you a last line.
Did you see it? It's amazing.
The late Ron Brown was the head of the Democratic National Committee. I happened to have been at an event, and I promise we'll go to break. It was his birthday, and he was getting gifts from people, public life. And there was a large assembled crowd in a room. Ron Brown, if you remember, was African American, the first party chair to be black. And a gift came, and they said, who's this one from? And it was from Lee Atwater. He opened it up, and it was a pack of Oreo cookies, okay? Now, Lee Atwater made it a living to get under the skin. And people may have laughed in the background, but I could see how that had and what Ron Brown must have been thinking and the bubble of thought that went over his head. And it didn't start with Lee Atwater. It won't end here with Rahm Emanuel, whoever else does it. But it's always been tough brass knuckle politics, but it just seems that it's getting less and less appealing, and I think we all suffer as a consequence. Okay, coming up next, everyone, one public figure who has made it more popular to be, at least in his position, and that is our pontiff. The Pope marks Holy Week with an unexpected homily and a whole lot of selfies. Is Pope Francis taking the Catholic Church in a more, let's say, open direction? Stay with us.